and points out that perhaps things are a little bit different than what our Western thought and cultures does. The most important thing to keep in mind is that it would go without saying, and it's not said in Luke, that if Joseph and pregnant Mary showed up in his wife's village of origin, they would be greeted as long-lost brothers and sisters, and no effort would be spared on their behalf. Kinship ties, as with us so frequently, were the strongest, most important realities of everyday life to these peasant people. To turn away relatives that were visiting, it was unthinkable. You didn't do it. And Mary's condition would only reaffirm that sociological fact. If Mary had shown up pregnant and alone in a strange town, the story might have been different. But she had Joseph's name, and she had the status of wife. And that made her pregnancy a joyful, positive expectation. But we're still getting over the statement, there's no room at the inn. That word translated as inn in Luke, in the Greek, is katalima. And that's a term that's used to designate a special guest chamber, usually attached to the home. Interesting. We find that same word, katalima, used where Jesus and the disciples gathered for their last Passover supper. Connect the dots, if you will. Indeed, what seems likely is that when they arrived in Bethlehem, Joseph probably sought out his family and asked for a place to stay. Yet because of the huge census that was going on, the town of Bethlehem was filled and crowded with visitors, and the separate guest room of his relative's home was already filled. So then we're told that the babe was laid in a manger. But when we look at this, knowing a little bit about Middle Eastern culture, it's not quite as bad as it first seems. In our Western eras, we see Joseph as this wimp, and he settles his poor, whimpering, laboring wife into a stable, leaving her nowhere to put that baby when it arrived, but in the feeding trough for the animals. Well, Bailey points out that Palestinian peasants kept any livestock that they had in their homes during cold, wintry nights. We would have had our sheep and our cows inside last night. Not only were the animals their most valuable possessions, they also added to the warmth of the home at night. So to make this arrangement possible, Palestinian homes were often built. They were constructed with an upper level to be used by the family, and they left the bottom level with hard-packed earthen floors for the animals. But built into the floors were wooden or stone feeding troughs, mangers, if you will, with sturdy, sloping sides that would serve nicely as a cradle. So with all of this in mind, Matthew's telling of this story reads a whole lot differently. Joseph brings Mary to the home of some of his relatives. And with their separate guest chamber already filled, the family says to Joseph and Mary, "Come on into the house. Join us in our living quarters." And there in the midst of the family, and certainly with other women to attend her, because further study shows that childbirth was ritually unclean for men, in the midst of the family and other women, Mary gave birth. And once that baby was clean, and once that baby was wrapped and swaddled, he was placed in the safety of a secure manger below, enabling Mary to get the rest that she needed. Just as Joseph welcomed Mary and her child into his life, and just as he invited God's Holy Spirit to work through all of them, surely we think Joseph's own relatives extended the hospitality of their home and their help to this young couple that needed them. A lot of people will say that the rejection of Jesus at the end was a foreshadowing of the rejection of Jesus 30-odd years later by the Jews. But if you read this story, it's not a foreshadowing of that. What it is it's a lesson for me, and it's a lesson to you in the fine art of being gracious and being hospitable and being kind and being caregiving to the strangers that come into our lives. It also helps us to understand that God works in strange and mysterious ways. So as we go away from here today, I want you to think about that supportive role that Joseph played in the Christmas story. Leading the donkey, standing quietly by, if all you do is read Luke. But if you study the Matthew story and understand the Middle Eastern cultures, what Matthew tells us is we all have a different role that we serve. And very, very few of us are stars. Most of us are in supporting roles, just like Joseph. And the supporting roles, just as Joseph is just as much worthy of praise and adoration and all that goes with it as those that are in the starring roles. Friends, we have a role, and it's very important. Look at Joseph and see how he did in his role. Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.